Immigrants shouldn't expect to have their culture respected if they don't respect the local culture. I am Mexican, and so have heard a lot about immigration. I also spent some time in the US, and I always saw very clear disdain from other immigrants with the excuse that Americans don't even have a culture. I also have read about how a lot of Syrian refugees had a tough time in Germany, and I get it, Germans are tough, but I'm Japanese and I respect the U.S. A lot of Americans also are taking interest into Japan, so I naturally return the favor without a second thought. Yep. I live in Vancouver, where there is a huge concentration of Chinese immigrants. A lot of these immigrants don't feel the need to assimilate in any manner because there is such a huge community here. Some of them don't bother learning any English, and get mad when you can't communicate with them. I've also had people get mad at me for not being Chinese. I'm Korean. Also, I found that for a lot of the mainland Chinese immigrants, public courtesy and courtesy in general is just not something they do. I understand that it is hard to have to learn a new language and adapt to a new culture. I'm a third culture kid who grew up everywhere. But that does not give them an excuse to be rude and disrespectful. Edit. Honestly, it's getting to the point where if you're not Chinese or speak Mandarin, a lot of places will not hire you simply because you won't be able to communicate in the customer's language. I personally feel like that is fundamentally wrong, especially because Mandarin is not an official language of the country, nor is it expected of us to learn it. I can very much relate to this. My family immigrated from India almost 30 years ago, and my brother and I are more American than we are Indian. You'd only know we are aware of Indian culture and can speak different languages because you'd have to ask. But I'm an American and I'm fucking proud of it. Does my country have flaws? Sure. Do some Americans still think my parents' culture is shit even after we've assimilated? Sure, but whatever, assholes will be assholes. The Indian community is terrible about this. They keep saying our kids need to be more Indian or America is ruining our kids. They have no values. What the hell did you expect moving here? That you'd make all the money and have all the status of being in America to brag about back home, but your kids would grow up being just as Indian as you? You can't get mad if I don't stand up and tall when the Indian anthem plays, because I grew up reciting the Pledge of Allegiance and listening to the Star-Spangled Banner. If you come here, keep your culture and traditions but learn the new ones too if you intend to call this home. I never understood moving to another country, and waving the flag of your home country around while saying the U.S. sucks. As someone who is married to a Mexican woman, I see this quite often in Latino communities. It's led me to believe that a lot of immigrants aren't looking to be American, learn about American culture, etc. They are only looking for the safety and economic opportunity that America provides. America to them is only a hub, not a final destination. This is very common in Asian cultures. Look at these white people, they have to resort to alcohol and therapists for their problems. They don't have family support systems like us. I just roll my eyes. This is why mental illness is running rampant in Asian cultures. The stigma is ridiculous. I pretty much agree with this. Like, I won't disrespect their culture, but if they don't want to integrate, then I wouldn't be too welcoming. I agree. I'm a Canadian born in a small town in northern Alberta. For my past 10 years of schooling every day we have stood up to listen to O Canada and the morning prayer. It's a Catholic school, but what I was shocked to learn is that some schools don't do this to respect immigrants' culture. But what I don't understand is, they chose to move to Canada, they chose to come here, so why the duck do they not respect the national anthem? And I can ignore the prayer part because I go to a religious school. My grandfather, 1924 to 2008, had an opinion on this, so I'll share that, as I agree with it. He said of his parents, and of the expectations of all immigrants at that time and beyond, keep your culture and traditions, but learn English, assimilate into the American lifestyle and culture. You moved here for a better life. And if you are emigrating to America to become an American citizen, then you are, after all, American. The people who say the US has no culture, it's because it's part of their culture too, to various degrees. The contrast one is used to when traveling from, say, Brazil to Ireland, to use an example, is fairly evident, so when you go to the US, it's less so. But there's very much a culture in the US, and it's based on the birth of the country, the founders, the values that define the country, and the growth up from that point. There should be a balance. I wouldn't expect someone to give up their entire cultural history, but I would expect them to adapt and absorb some of their adopted culture as well. I think assimilation in the traditional sense isn't beneficial to anyone because it keeps us from evolving. If immigrants assimilated totally, we wouldn't have tacos or lasagna. Nobody would hear salsa or reggae. There are beautiful things to be absorbed from immigrant cultures. I agree, and I think it goes to language as well. Expecting someone in another country to speak to you in your preferred language is really a big indulgence, and the reason a lot of Americans abroad are looked down upon. For better or worse, if you are moving somewhere, it's on you to learn the language and customs of that area. It doesn't mean giving up your own culture. As an example, I love Japanese culture and would consider moving there, but I'd bust my ass to learn Japanese so that I wasn't being entitled and expecting people to speak English with me. Having lived near the US-Mexican border, I was a little surprised by how many people, on the US side, I mean, would simply refuse to speak English and expect you to speak Spanish. While I'm sure many of the people were quite nice, it really came across as off-putting. I think it's contextual. Like, you should respect if a Muslim needs to take a break to pray, but I'm not obligated to respect a person being late consistently because it was okay to be late back home if you were helping family. If I acted exactly the same when I was living in China that I do here, they would have deported me. But yet, for some reason people think America is a free-for-all and there are no norms you have to adapt to.